Imagine this. You live in Jerusalem about 2,000 years ago. And you are living there under Roman rule. You don't want Rome to be in charge. That just happens to be who's in charge at the given time. And for years, there's always been turmoil. There's always been questions of uprisings against whoever's occupying, and you just hold fast to the promises of God the best you can. Well, it's nearing Passover, so you've got family that live out in other parts of the world among the other nations that are traveling to Jerusalem for the Passover. You have old friends who are coming back. You only get to see them a couple times a year maybe. And you're expecting all of this. But one thing you weren't expecting is that there is a man from Nazareth. He's a little bit different. People think he's a prophet. And he's been going around and really causing a lot of problems for himself over the last couple of years, and you've really just started to hear about him recently, especially as rumors about him have come forward. He goes around and he actually doesn't interpret the law the same way the religious leaders in Jerusalem does. He interprets it completely differently. He even says that he came to fulfill the law. He's kind of really making people mad. And he's been going around and upsetting a lot of people because he says a lot of radical new things. But what's really interesting about him is you've heard that he heals people. There are sick people that he's healed. There are people on the verge of death. Some of them, it's rumored, they actually died, and he healed them. There are even people that were born, maybe they're born blind, and you heard that he healed them. They can see now. And what's really radical and what's really upset the people at the temple is he's even done that on the Sabbath day, saying that it was more important that he heal them than that he not. You're not quite sure what to think about this Jesus of Nazareth. You even hear that there are people who are completely out of their mind. They wanted to hurt other people, hurt themselves. People said they were demon-possessed, and he cast out the demons that were in them. And they said they became completely lucid in a moment, just completely normal. People who went back to their towns and told everyone, I'm completely cured. People were afraid of them, but they were completely cured. You don't know what to make of this Jesus of Nazareth, but there's a lot of excitement in the city because rumor has it he's coming for the Passover. And maybe you're in your house and maybe you're getting some bread ready, unleavened, of course, or doing some other household chores, and a neighbor comes by and says, come and see. Jesus of Nazareth is coming in the city. Let's go. So you run out and you go to the gate, and there's all these crowds. I mean, it's kind of something you've never seen before. I mean, especially for just some guy from Nazareth. Nothing good comes from Nazareth. So you're just showing up there, and you can see in the distance people are coming, but you can't see quite what's going on yet. But all of a sudden, the people in the crowds just start taking off their coats and laying it on the ground. Some of them have palm branches. And you're thinking, what is going on right now? But you just think, okay, well, just join in with the crowd, don't want to look weird, and you take off your coat and you lay it down. Well, all of a sudden, at the beginning of where the gate is coming in, you see someone riding in on this little donkey. And you're like, okay, not what I was expecting. I mean, some people, they say he's a prophet, but some people even say he's the Christ and he's riding into town on a donkey. That's unusual. It's not what you were expecting. And when he gets close enough that you can see him, two things strike you. One, there was nothing about his appearance that would make you think he was grand or important at all. He's just a plain guy from Nazareth, Jewish fellow, just like you, on a donkey. But the other thing that's odd is as he is riding in, the people have not only thrown their coats down, they've started to sing from the Psalms, and they've started to say, Hosanna, meaning pray, Lord, save us. And they started singing, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. And before too long, you're just joining in with them. You're just taken over by it all. It's amazing. Well, he rides by. You'll all keep singing. He rides by, and all of a sudden, things die down eventually, and you all go home. Okay, Jesus is in town. That's really neat. Well, a day or two go by, and your neighbor comes back by again and said, did you hear about Jesus of Nazareth? You say, of course I did. I went with you to see him come. And said, no, did you hear what he did? Like, what are you talking about? He said, right after he got into town, he went into the temple, and he started turning over the tables. He started criticizing what they were doing there, and he drove out the money changers, the people who were taking money and selling things to the poor, and he just completely lost it. We don't know what he's doing, but you can't believe how mad all the political leaders are at the temple. The priests are mad, the scribes are mad, all the Pharisees are hanging out with the Herodians and talking, and you're like, what? They're talking to each other. Yes, they're talking to each other. I don't think it's not looking good for this Jesus. They're mad at him. A couple days go by. You've heard a little rumors here and there of what's been going on, but nothing too crazy has happened yet. But early on Friday morning that week, get a knock on your door again. Your neighbor comes and says, come and see what's happening. You say, what's going on? They said, they've got Jesus of Nazareth. They put him on trial, and now the Romans are trying him. Come and see what happens. So you rush down and you go, and you see Pontius Pilate. You know, nobody there really likes Pontius Pilate. He's just a sellout for Rome. He's just a guy that got sent there by the governor. You know, nobody disrespects him necessarily. He's not the worst, but he's not the best. He does crucify people, for goodness sake. So you show up, and he comes out, and he says, I can find no fault with this man. He says, but in accordance with the traditions, on this day, I'll release one of the prisoners. And he pulls out another guy. Now, you recognize that guy immediately. Now, he stands out. He's strong and he's ugly. And you know that he has a reputation for causing problems. Not only that, might even be a murderer, you hear. He has been fighting against Rome nonstop, wanting to just take them over. And you're thinking, oh, well, this is good for Jesus of Nazareth, you know. He's kind of strange. He's weird. He did threaten to tear down the temple and build it in 3 days, but who knows what he means by that? That's so weird. You think he's going to get set free. Pontius Pilate doesn't think there's a problem with him. This other guy's terrible. That's what's going to happen. And all of a sudden, the crowds start yelling, give us Barabbas, the other guy, the revolutionary. You start to think, what is going on? They want Barabbas. That guy's awful. I mean, I know that I support him doing what he does. I just don't like it. I wouldn't do it myself. I do want Rome to be taken over, but, the way he does it. But the more the crowds yell, you kind of start to go, maybe I don't know some things about Jesus. Maybe he's worse than I think. Well, they release Barabbas, and Pontius Pilate's beside himself. You can tell that he's pretty flustered, which does not happen very often with Pilate. And he says, what should I do with this man? What do you want me to do with him? And the crowds begin to yell, crucify him. Crucify him. Crucify him. And before too long, there you are, standing with him, just like when he entered the city, going along with the crowd and saying, crucify him. My question is, how does a man who enters a city with people praising, saying, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, the same man that on Friday the crowd say, crucify him? As we look at Psalm 118, I think we get an idea of the picture. That this Jesus of Nazareth, this prophet, was also the Christ, the anointed one of Israel, but that his way of doing things looked a lot differently than what everyone expected. Now, as we look to this psalm, we see that God loves to the uttermost. He loves to the uttermost. His love knows no bounds. We see that because of the common refrain that we hear throughout this psalm. We hear it in other psalms. His steadfast love endures forever. That's at the very beginning of this psalm in verse 1. Oh, give thanks to the Lord, for he is good, for his steadfast love endures forever. And it's repeated at the very end in verse 29. And throughout the first few verses, it's repeated. His steadfast love endures forever. It says, let Israel say, God's people say this, his steadfast love endures forever. Let the house of Aaron, the house of the priest, say, his steadfast love endures forever. And then look outward. Let those who fear the Lord whether they be Israelites or of the house of Aaron or not, let those who fear the Lord say, his steadfast love endures forever. Now this steadfast love, the old translation, when they translated the Bible into English, was loving kindness. You've probably heard that. They had to invent a word to try to make sense of this one. Loving kindness. Since then, a lot of Bible translations have preferred something like steadfast love because they see that this word is used in the context of the covenant. It's used in the context of God's promise to his people to be their God and for them to be his people. It's his steadfast love to them. It's his love that keeps the covenant. It's his love that doesn't break his promises. It's his love that knows no end. It's the same kind of love that we can see illustrated by marriage. In a healthy marriage, there is a promise that is made and it is kept. It is maintained. The love they have for one another might be fleeting emotionally at times, might be fleeting intellectually at times. But what is maintained? The love of the covenant. The love for the one you made a covenant to, and that you made the covenant under, which was God. That kind of love where when a spouse dies, the preacher gets to say things like they were married faithfully for 40, 50, 60, I've even heard sometimes 70 years, right? That's the kind of steadfast love we see in our lives, but for God it doesn't work in decades. It works in centuries and millennia. For hundreds and thousands of years, God's steadfast love. The same love that he had all the way back with Adam and Eve when he said that you can live in this garden, work this garden, have all the fruit from the trees in this garden except for the fruit from the knowledge of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. You can have from the tree of life and all the other trees in the garden, but not that one. It's the same steadfast love that when they ate of it, he banished them from the garden, but promised them that one was coming who would make it all right. It's the same love he showed to Abraham when he said, Abraham, look to the sky and see all the stars. So will your descendants be. When Abraham didn't even have a descendant. It's the same love that went to Moses and said, go to Pharaoh and say, let my people go. I am Yahweh. I am who I am. And he said, how am I supposed to talk to them? I'm a stutterer. What am I supposed to say? I'm not eloquent. And he says, well, I'll give you Aaron. And Aaron will, in the same way I speak to you, you will speak to Aaron, and he will speak it to the Pharaoh on your behalf. It's the same steadfast love that when the nation of Israel wanted a king, he gave them David. It's the same steadfast love that brought us Jesus Christ. The same steadfast love that from the line and lineage of Abraham and of David brings us Jesus Christ in a little town called Bethlehem to grow up in a hometown of Nazareth. It's his steadfast love that sees us through it all, over hundreds, over thousands of years. And 2,000 years almost since Jesus walked this earth before his crucifixion and resurrection. We still feel the Lord's steadfast love. And because God loves to the uttermost, the psalmist believes he can save to the uttermost. We'll get we'll start in verse 5. Just get this picture of the psalmist crying out to God. When we read the Psalms, as we have been for several Sundays, we get this picture of crying out to God, and here it is again. Out of my distress I called on the Lord. The Lord answered me and set me free. The Lord is on my side. I will not fear. What can man do to me? The Lord is on my side as my helper. I shall look and triumph on those who hate me. It is better to take refuge in the Lord than to trust in man. It is better to take refuge in the Lord than to trust in princes. All nations surrounded me. In the name of the Lord, I cut them off. They surrounded me on every side. In the name of the Lord, I cut them off. They surrounded me like bees. They went out like a fire among thorns. In the name of the Lord, I cut them off. I was pushed hard so that I was falling, but the Lord helped me. Hear this. The Lord is my strength and my song. He has become my salvation. Glad songs of salvation are in the tents of the righteous. The right hand of the Lord does valiantly. The right hand of the Lord exalts. The right hand of the Lord does valiantly. And then the psalmist writes, I shall not die, but I shall live, and recount the deeds of the Lord. The Lord has disciplined me severely, but he has not given me over to death. In these words, we hear not just a psalmist who is crying out to God and recognizing God as the only refuge he can trust in, that God is his salvation, but that God saves beyond what we can imagine. Verse 14, it says, the Lord is my strength and my song. He has become my salvation. That's actually a direct quote from Exodus chapter 15 and verse 2. It's a direct quote from after Moses leads, on behalf of God, the Israelites out of Egypt. They're on the other side of the water. And he sings a song in Exodus 15, a song that calls upon the work that God has done and the life that they're going to have now and how they're going to witness to what God has done among the nations. I'd encourage you later to go read that song and then read these verses in this psalm, because you'll see the connection very clearly. That whatever God is doing in this psalm, whatever God is trying to do in this psalm, is a new exodus. The kind of salvation that God brought when he brought a whole nation out of Egypt against all odds is the same kind of salvation that God is bringing in a new way that is being foretold by Psalm 118. God saves to the uttermost. God saves even more than we can imagine. God frees us from what enslaves us. For the Israelites then, it was Egypt. But for us now, all people are enslaved to sin. All people have been giving the authority and the power that God has given them by being made in his image. They're giving it up to these masters. They're giving it up to the things that they worship, those things that they spend their time, energy, and money on besides God and more than God. So God saves to the uttermost. Now I want to look at verses 19 through 24, and this is where I want to spend most of our time, because it is so important. What we learn in these verses is that the rejected stone becomes the cornerstone. So this calls our mind to Jesus' entry into Jerusalem. Open to me the gates of righteousness, that I may enter through them, and give thanks to the Lord. This is the gate of the Lord. The righteous shall enter through it. I thank you that you have answered me and have become my salvation. The stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. This is the Lord's doing. It is marvelous in our eyes. This is the day that the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. Now that verse 22, the stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone, is commonly quoted in the New Testament. And when it's in the New Testament, in Acts chapter 4, or Ephesians 2, or in 1 Peter 2, or even in the Gospels, when Jesus quotes it, the stone he interprets and the apostles interpret to be Jesus himself. That when he shows up in Jerusalem, they might say on that first day, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. But by the end of the week, he is rejected by his own people. He is rejected by those who are running the temple. He is rejected by the nation that is occupying them. Now, I don't know if you've done much stonework. I have not. Now, when I think of stonework, I think of what we have around here, which is usually we take stones and we take some cement and we put it all together, like brickwork or anything like that. Now, when I was in Israel, I just visited there a few years ago. When I was there were actually buildings they had. There were these marvelous walls and structures. And they had stood for, at this point, thousands of years. And it was amazing that when they would point out that there wasn't any cement between those stones. They just fit all the stones together. Now, they might come in and cut a little bit here and there to make it fit just right. But they would build these walls and these structures just by fitting all the stones together. And the gravity would hold it together, and they've been there for thousands of years. Now, when they go about this process, they might be looking through the stones, and when they have a stone that surely won't fit, they might just toss it aside and reject it. The image we have here is of a builder rejecting a stone. Now, for the Pharisees, or the Sadducees, or the Herodians, or the Zealots, all those people that were little political factions in Jerusalem, Jesus did not fit what they were constructing. He did not fit the systems they were constructing. He didn't fit the ideologies they were constructing. He didn't fit the prophecies they were constructing. They all had different ideas of how it was going to work. Maybe the Zealots thought the Messiah, the Christ, was going to show up. The anointed one of Israel was going to show up. And he'd come on a giant horse, and he would just come with all of his warrior strength and just take over Jerusalem on behalf of God. Maybe the Sadducees thought he would come and just wipe them all out. Pharisees maybe thought he was going to come, and instead of dying and being resurrected, he was going to resurrect everyone else, and they were going to uprise and take over. They all had different theories, and even in those groups, they had different ideas of what was going to happen. But Jesus did not fit what they thought. He did not come and say, "Oh, Pharisees, you've constructed such good rules about the law. Good for you. I'm going to follow them, and I'm going to support you all, and I'm going to do what you would like." He didn't come in to the Sadducees and say, "Oh, there is no resurrection of the dead. Y'all are right about that." He didn't come to the Zealots and say, "The work you're doing is important. Let me lead you to do more." Jesus showed up and didn't fit the systems they were constructing, the ideologies they were constructing, the religion they were constructing. He didn't fit. And he was disruptive. He was disrupting everything they were trying to do. He was saying, "You have heard it said this, I say this." He was coming and undoing all the work they'd been doing, some of them for centuries, to build up religion and build up a system, a way to get to God. You can almost get the image of the Tower of Babel at the beginning of Genesis, as they created this new invention, the brick, and started building up a tower to reach God. Well, the Pharisees and the Sadducees and all those folks were not building up a tower to reach God of physical construction, but they were building up a religion. They were building up an ideology. They were building up a system to reach God themselves. Instead of letting Jacob's ladder come down to them, they wanted to climb it for themselves. Jesus didn't fit. When they got to him, they couldn't put him in place. And when they tried to sculpt him to fit where they wanted him, it didn't work. He would ask them questions they couldn't answer. He would give them answers that were, they couldn't even rebut. They were just too powerful. They didn't know what to do with him. He even got endorsed by John the Baptist. They got rid of him, but they couldn't yet get rid of Jesus. And so what do? They reject him. They throw him in the discard pile. Quite literally, they destroy him. They take him and they hang him on a cross until he died and breathed his last breath. But what is so amazing about Jesus is that although he did not fit their systems, though he did not fit the religion they were trying to construct, though he did not fit what they were expecting, Jesus was a lot more stubborn than they thought. He did not stay dead in the ground. But on the third day, he rose again. And as he rose, he launched a new creation. He launched a new way of the world. When he was resurrected, he made himself the cornerstone of it all. So that now, it's not about trying to make Jesus fit what you're trying to construct, but instead it's taking Jesus and placing him as the cornerstone, the very beginning of the structure, and making sense of it all around him. Instead of going to the Old Testament and deciding what you think and then turning to Jesus and making him fit, they say, make sense of Jesus. Understand who he is. Put him at the cornerstone of your life and build everything around it. So that our role as Christians is not to figure out how Jesus fits our political ideology. It's not to figure out how Jesus fits the religion we prefer, whether we mean by that an actual religion or a denomination or anything like that. It's not to figure out how Jesus fits into the sinful lifestyle that I keep living. How he allows me, he didn't specifically say anything about the sin that I enjoy, so I can just keep doing it. I can go to church on Sunday and still on Monday be the person I want to be. The goal is not to try to make Jesus fit the life that you have constructed for yourself. In fact, Jesus would like to come, and as he said, he would tear the temple down and rebuild it in 3 days. Not only would he do that for himself in his death and resurrection, he wants to do that in your life. He wants to come down and knock down the walls that keep him from fitting in your life. He wants to come and knock it all down. And he wants you to place him as the cornerstone and then figure out, after you've done that, what fits then. My question for you this morning is, are you going to be like the builders who pick up Jesus and say, this just doesn't fit what I'm trying to do? Or are you going to decide that maybe what you've been trying to do without Jesus isn't worth doing whatsoever, and place him at the very beginning and start from scratch again? Put it another way, are you going to yell out with the crowds, crucify him? Or are you going to cry out, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord? Let's pray.